name's Greg Lawton. I was a project manager on the SG-class nuclear submarine program. I'm a trained physicist and strategist, and now I'm CEO of a venture capital-backed deep tech firm that's building the core piece of the computer infrastructure that humanity is going to need over the next 30, 50, 100 years, with a specific application focus of complex projects. So I spend a large amount of time looking at the strategic structure and economic design of the major project sector with a view of Silicon Valley innovation. So the point of this series is to better understand and predict what the future of mega projects are going to be in the UK and both across the world by examining the fundamentals of what major projects are and the fundamentals of what innovation is. Now, to get started, by the definition of innovation, what I'm talking about is not incremental innovation, but fundamentally disruptive innovation that changes either the structure or the economics, or the structure and economics of a market. So just to explain what those are. Economic change is fundamentally change that changes the income statement of a business or a market in general. So a perfect example of this is SpaceX, where by incorporating vertical integration, by looking for repetitive production of rockets, looking for reusable technology, rocket technologies, etc., they have driven down the price of launches, going on about tenfold right now. An example of a structural change to a market, and structure covers things like the market shares, the distribution of market shares, the market boundaries, etc. An example is Microsoft with its Word package against WordPerfect a number of decades ago, where what they fundamentally did is change the boundaries of the market by bundling Microsoft Word with other products, which changed the word processing market to a general enterprise software market, of which then WordPerfect weren't equipped to battle them, etc. And I'm sure a quick look on Wikipedia everyone can see how that worked out. So that's what we're talking about here. So the fundamental questions are, what is going to happen in the general industry in either policy or technology or people or demand or supply or whatever that is going to change the fundamental structure and economics of major projects? Yes, they have, in both regards. The general issue we have with projects is that it's not stuck. So an example of a structural change that major projects have gone through is, for example, the commercial structure change of the Heathrow Terminal 5 contract, which was highly collaborative in nature, rather than the more standoffish and combative contracts of the past. I'm sure every listener of this will agree that some of those combative contracts do still exist, and the more collaborative structural contracts have not permeated completely. An example of an economic shift that's actually happening right now is the government's pursuit of design for assembly, which what it's fundamentally doing is shifting a small amount of cost into the design space for a large reduction in cost of later down of the operational delivery of major projects. My challenge to this is that whilst a large amount of major projects can be transferred into more of a production space, there's actually a high amount of complex specific activity which sits in the domain of complex project management, which cannot. So we are driving an economic change through design for assembly, but we're leaving a large amount of opportunity on the table. A similar example is the equivalent of SpaceX looking at using in-house production methodologies to drive down the individual cost of a rocket, but then not looking at how to reuse rockets on a per launch basis to drive down cost even further. So this is actually a very, very key point, and something that I would love to get opinions and comments on. I would argue that current thinking is that projects are there to deliver successful outcomes, and project budgets are there to pay for the tasks, jobs, suppliers, resources needed to get those successful outcomes. In that regard, I'd argue 2 points of why this isn't true. A project is an operation to produce outputs. A value proposition is something to produce an outcome. A value proposition is the business case for a project, but is not just the project. It contains other things. So I would argue that those need to be split, and value management, even though they have to be integrated at some level so you make sure you're building the right thing, value management is separate than operational efficiency. So it's effectiveness and efficiency. But the second point is, I think, a more fundamental point, which is project budgets are not there to pay for suppliers or pay for building materials or people or whatever. They're there to buy you successful and repetitive milestones. It's an investment decision. So if we look at another market, let's say the equities market, when I buy a share, I am looking for a certain amount of growth and I'm looking for a certain level of risk. And if I'm a professional investment manager, what I do is I use a vast amount of data to understand the discrepancies between the assets that provide me a return with risk, and I look to buy the best ones. I would argue that in major projects, that is fundamentally our job at a management level. We're looking for the best ways of purchasing milestone delivery. Now, I'll leave that point there and we can explore it a lot more in future videos, but to expand on this point further, I would encourage everyone watching this to watch the movie Moneyball, which is fundamentally based on the same principle and regards the baseball league in America back in the early turn of the century.